Our next lesson in slope will be with parallel and perpendicular lines. Now, you should have a good sense or understanding of parallel and perpendicular lines from your experience in geometry. From an algebra standpoint, what we need to realize is how the slopes values relate to each other. And so we have this nice little summary here in the box, and we can see that parallel lines, their slopes values equal, and you can see what that would look like visually, how they would run side by side and never intersect, based off of your geometry definition. So from an algebra definition, we know that the slopes are equal to each other. Now, for perpendicular lines, the slopes are going to form 90-degree angles, and the easiest way to see that mathematically is through the slopes being opposite reciprocals, or sometimes students like to call them negative reciprocals. So if we take the original sloping line and we take the opposite value and we make a reciprocal, then that will be the slope of the perpendicular line. And so we'll have some problems asking you whether different lines are parallel, perpendicular, or neither, and you can see in example 3, this is a perfect example of it. We give you two lines passing through a couple points for each line. So your first task is to find the slope of each line and then make a comparison of those slopes. And so we can see that the slope of the first line is negative 2/3, and the slope of the second line is 3/2. And if we make a comparison of these, they are actually negative reciprocals of each other. And then, of course, another test that we can also use if we look up in our previous summary is that the slope of the two lines should equal to -1. And so that is another way that we can tell if the slopes are perpendicular. And so if we take negative 2/3 and multiply them times 3/2, we get a -1 value. So there's a couple different ways for us to make that determination. So then we could say that these two lines are perpendicular. So what we want you to do is to get some experience doing that. So for sample problem number 3, you're going to basically work a similar problem using the example as a guide. So go ahead and pause the video and work on that now. Okay, so our first task here is to get the slope of the first line, and we'll use a little 1 after our slope to just signify that that's the slope of the first line, or line 1. So I'm going to start with 4 minus 1 over 3 minus a -3, and again, remember the order doesn't matter as long as you stay consistent. And so we have a slope of 1/2. So the first slope is going to be 1/2. Our second slope, I say 1 minus a -3 over 4 minus a -4. And be sure to put your y's on top and your x's on bottom. It's going to give us 4 over 8, which is also going to equal to 1/2. And so we can see that here we have two slopes that are equal to each other. So if M1 equals to M2, we now know that those are parallel lines. And of course, if we wanted to, we could graph or plot the 2 points and then draw a line through them, and we could visually see whether they were parallel or not. Now, on this final little table, one of the things that we need to be able to do is to quickly be able to determine what the slope is, if it's parallel or perpendicular, without actually having to solve anything. So if we're given an equation of a line and we recognize the slope, we can quickly determine the slope for parallel and perpendicular lines as well. And so what we'll do is we'll quickly fill this table out. So for the first column, we're given the slope of the original line. And so what this table is saying is, in the second column, if we're given a parallel slope, we want you to figure out what the slope is of a parallel line to the original slope. So go ahead and fill out the middle column. Okay, and so what I'm going to do here is, if the slope of the first line is 1, then my parallel slope should also be 1. And so if it's -3, the parallel slope is -3. And if we can just continue down, we see that the parallel slopes are all the same for the original slope. Now, if we're looking for the slope of a perpendicular line, we want to do the third column. So we need to compare the first slope, and we need to take the negative reciprocal, or sometimes called the opposite reciprocal. So go ahead and try to fill out the third column now. Okay, and so for the first slope, the reciprocal of 1 is obviously 1, but we have to take the negative value of that. For negative 3, the opposite of negative 3 is just a positive, and then the reciprocal is 1/3. For 4, we're going to have negative 1/4. For 5, the reciprocal is 5/2, and of course we have to take the negative. For negative 1/3, that's going to give us a positive 3/1, and then of course that is simply just 3. And then last one is 0. Now this is the tricky one, because the reciprocal of 0 is not 0/1. If we recall, if it's a slope of 0, we're dealing with a horizontal line. So now, if we're taking the perpendicular towards a horizontal line, we're dealing with a vertical line, and we know that the slope of a vertical line is undefined. And so it's a tricky little one, and it's a very important one for you to know. Okay, and that's a quick lesson on perpendicular and parallel line slopes.